Here to assess the impacts of legislation from the 2012 session to the Department of Natural Resources, we have its Commissioner, Tom Landwehr. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Commissioner, let's talk a little bit about the significant number of bills that did pass through the legislature last session that centered on the environment, fish, wildlife. What do you think of all of these? You know, with the hunting and fishing fees, the removal of the school trust lands, but what do you think will impact Minnesotans the most?
Well, I think the thing that people will be most obvious to people, obviously, is the hunting and fishing fees. You know, it's a relatively modest amount. I mean, we're talking about a fishing license that is still less than $2 a month, you know, for really outstanding fishing opportunity in the state of Minnesota. But it's a thing that will be immediately obvious when people, you know, go to buy their license in March of 2013. But the long-term impact of that is relatively modest on individuals. It's very significant in terms of maintaining our programs for fish and wildlife. You know, we really do have blue ribbon opportunities here in Minnesota with fish and wildlife, and this will allow us to maintain those programs that hunters and anglers want. So I think the longer-term benefit will be perhaps not as noticeable, but it will be more significant in terms of the total benefit to Minnesotans. But we had a couple of other major bills that got a lot of media attention that people should be aware about. They may or may not have a personal impact on that. One, of course, is a wolf season. The legislature gave us authority to sell a wolf license and have a wolf season, so we'll be establishing that framework for this fall. And we're proposing to have 6,000 licenses to allow a harvest of up to 400 wolves. And so that will be on, and you know, that'll be very obvious to some people, obviously those who are applying. But the piece of legislation that was potentially the most problematic that was introduced early in the session had to do with the school trust lands. And for those that don't know, there's about 2.5 million acres in the state that are owned by the state that were provided to the state by the federal government back at the time of settlement to establish a funding source for an education system. We got 8 million acres from the federal government. We have 2.5 million acres left. All of the remaining acres were sold, and we still generate revenue off of those 2.5 million acres by virtue of timber and taconite primarily. So we're putting money into this fund, a $750 million fund that then spits off interest and dividends for the schools. The legislature said, you know what, we think we can squeeze more money out of this land base. So they originally proposed to take the lands out of management of DNR and put them under a whole new agency and create a new bureaucracy around that. Through the legislative process and ultimately with the governor's assistance, we changed that package a little bit so that the department still administers the lands. There will be a separate individual director of trust land management that will sit outside the department, that will look at what we're doing, you know, advise us on how to do things differently, ascertain that what we're doing is the right thing, and you know, put more focus on school trust lands, which is a good thing.
I want to go back to the hunting and fishing fees real quickly. Even Bud Grant even came out in favor of it. Yeah. Obviously an icon here in Minnesota, but there wasn't a lot of opposition from the actual gaming community. It came from other entities. How important is this revenue to keep Minnesota's fish and wildlife intact?
Well, you know, it really is a great question. I wrote a commentary after the session thanking people for this, and in doing that I did a little bit of research. I went back to a newspaper, the Winona Republican Eagle, published in 1899, that had a note to hunters and anglers that the Minnesota Game Protective Association was advocating for a license. They wanted a hunting license that all hunters would have to buy so that they could establish a fund to maintain populations. And so the significance of that is that for more than 100 years, hunters and anglers in Minnesota have been asking to tax themselves for the opportunity to go hunting and fishing so that we can reinvest in this renewable resource. And so we have had this significant support of the hunting and angling community, including people like Bud Grant and Ron Schera and Al Lindner, who came here to the Capitol to talk about this, because the last time we had an increase was in 2001. Right. Gasoline was $1.74 a gallon back in 2001. People don't remember that, but all of those inflationary factors that hit every Minnesotan also hit the work we can do. So we have not been able to keep pace with inflation. We seriously have a program that is a lot like Swiss cheese. You know, a lot of big holes that are left as a result of belt tightening over the last 5 years. So recognizing that the value of the dollars they spend, recognizing that we were falling behind, and recognizing we're talking about a very modest increase, really the hunting and angling community came out in force and supported us.
Let's jump to fighting aquatic invasive species. The last time we spoke with you, there were some ideas for research and development, a bubble barrier. Where have we moved forward with that?
Three big things to come out of this session. One, we got some funding for Asian carp barriers. So the legislature gave us $7.5 million out of the Outdoor Heritage Fund to do engineering and construction of electric barriers or other barrier technology at Lock and Dam 1, which is a Ford Dam, and Lock and Dam 2, which is a Hastings Dam. So we're moving ahead with working with the Corps of Engineers, who's a critical partner in that, to see what we can do in those two sites. Additionally, the legislature gave us authority to increase the penalties, to increase our ability to enforce aquatic invasive species law, especially things like zebra mussels, and they gave us authority to pass some of that jurisdiction to local units of government. So we'll be able to partner more closely with lake improvement districts or watershed districts or counties and cities to help marshal the forces, if you will, in the war against zebra mussels. And thirdly, and very significantly as well, they also provided funding for a new research institute at the University of Minnesota. And the mission of that research institute will be to look at how to help manage or control invasive species, aquatic invasive species, both Asian carp, zebra mussels, and anything else that might come along.
How about enforcement of people who are not doing their part by wiping off their boats, doing what they need to do with their boats? Are you going to step up enforcement as well, and fees, or fines to go with those as well?
Quite a bit. A year ago, the legislature gave us additional enforcement authority for invasive species, so that we have, we have more inspectors out there who have some authority to prevent boats from entering a lake if they've got aquatic invasive species on them. B, we got a one-time appropriation last year as well to increase the number of hours of enforcement time we can put out there. And then we got additional penalties that the legislature provided us. So when you look at controlling, especially with zebra mussels, there's four aspects of that. One is we have to let people know what the problem is, and because ultimately it's going to be up to people to deal with the issue. So we have to have education. We have to have the statutes. We have to have the law around that so we can do enforcement. So enforcement is a big part of that. We have to, we're going to be doing some work with decontamination units. So we're going to acquire 20 of these decontamination units that will spread around the state to show people how to clean their boat. And we're going to have inspections. So we're going to have 150 different inspectors around the state working at accesses to show people what they should be looking for.
Those numbers that you're citing seem relatively small compared with the number of bodies of water we have in the state. So I guess this is your opportunity, Commissioner. Summer season is kicking in officially with Memorial Day weekend. What do you want to tell Minnesotans as your office works to battle these invasive species? Well,
this relates especially to zebra mussels. The primary vector for zebra mussels going from lake to lake is people. And we have 850,000 registered boats in this state. There are 3,000 public accesses. Half of those are under DNR's control. But there is no human way possible for us to be inspecting every boat as it's moving from lake to lake to make sure that they're following the law. So it really is an area where we have to count on the average citizen who owns a boat, who's moving a boat, to know about invasive species, know what the law is that they have to abide by, and take the right steps to prevent the spreading aquatic invasive species. Now, having said that, the last two instances that we're aware of where zebra mussels were spread by lakeshore owners who moved a boat lift from an infested water to an uninfested water. So we have to focus on, again, all Minnesotans, not just the boat owners, because there's a number of ways that the zebra mussels can be spread. We have to be aware that education at the end of the day is our strongest tool.
And I'm going to be honest, Commissioner, I'm a kayaker, and until we've had this conversation, I never thought that this applied to me, but given the information you just detailed, do canoers and kayakers need to be cognizant of this as well?
Absolutely. Even people with bait buckets, minnow buckets can move invasive species. Anything that can move water from one body of water to another has a potential to be a vector for zebra mussels. So anybody, they're talking now about even think of hip boots that trout anglers might wear, felt soles on the bottom of those. Terrible at picking up invasive species. And if you use it in an infested water one day, next day you move to an uninfested water, you could be spreading them with hip boots. So you have to be just totally conscious that when you're in a body of water, when you leave that body of water, make sure you're not taking anything along with you.
Okay, with those words, very informative. Thank you, Commissioner Landwehr. We appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here.